I'm going to hand over to Jo Parry-Geddes. And Jo is a director and conservation specialist at Mill Architects. She is an advanced conservation accredited architect with the RIS. And she has 19 years of experience working with churches, leading over 95 church projects, ranging from minor repairs to major redevelopment. So we're all looking forward to what you've got to say, Jo, and over to you.
Hi guys, thanks for coming today. My name is Jo Parry-Geddes. I'm a conservation architect and director of Mill Architects. Sarah has very kindly asked me to talk to you about being an architect and how you guys can work with your architect if you're starting off a project of repurposing your church, which may seem quite daunting, which it often can. So I thought I'd give you a brief overview on the current status on ecclesiastical buildings. I thought we could discuss different options that many church groups are finding themselves in this current climate, what you need to have in place to achieve a positive outcome, and how to begin reviewing what you have or may be losing, which is a case up here in Scotland a lot at the moment. Working successfully with your architect is obviously really important, and I can try and give you my side of things, understanding practicalities and realities. I've thrown in a bit about fabric repair and thermal efficiency because it's just so important in buildings, what resources there are out there. And I've put in a couple of case studies. Some are really small scale, but can make a huge difference to a building, whilst others are of a larger scale. So here's my cheesy slide with my smiling face saying what we do. So we are an architect firm based in South Queensferry in Edinburgh. We have 8 in our wonderful team who are incredibly enthusiastic. I lead up the conservation sector of Mill Architects, and one of those specialisms, of course, is working with churches of all denominations. So throughout my career, there's been lots of quinquennial inspections carried out, feasibility studies, fabric repair projects has been a big one. And now more and more we're finding internal and external alterations to churches and their associated buildings. We mustn't forget about their associated buildings, either their manses, their presbyteries, or their church halls, some of all which can be combined that might need separated, so things can get quite complicated. So changes within existing churches or church groups can be a really sensitive issue. And I find that you really do have to take the time to sit down with the church group and understand what it is that they're wanting, understand the requirements of not only the church, but the community and the building users, to make sure that everyone's on the same page of what needs to be done and what wants to be achieved. So what's going on with churches? The big question. Well, also just to say as well, sorry, when I go back to making sure that you get the right architect for the job, that Tom's going to give us a good chat about how he found his architect and how he works very well with her. And I think it's a really important thing to get the right person to do the job. So what is going on with churches? Well, I'm a member of Churchill National Trust Steering Group. And to date, we've counted around 25 to about 30 different types of denominations in Scotland. The one leading theme is that worship is in decline generally, which is causing huge problems to the economy of various denominations and of course their buildings. Up here in Scotland, I appreciate a lot of you are based down in England. But due to a number of factors, including the reduction in faith and the current economic crisis, the Church of Scotland are selling a large amount of their property stock to enable consolidation of places of worship. So churches up here are finding that they're having to combine with other churches, sell their churches or have their churches sold on their behalf, along with their associated buildings, which can be really hard and cause a lot of unrest within the communities. The Church of Scotland have made the difficult decision to create presbytery plans. They've put them into different categories. A category A is to retain it, or a category B is to have it sold. So these are the things that are going on, which is causing a great deal of unrest and uncertainty. In general, though, churches are noted to be in a mixed condition. Some have been well maintained and looked after with good amenities within. And when I mean amenities, I mean WCs, ramps, DDA compliance for the disabled, wheelchair users. However, many churches, due to a lack of funding and uncertainty over what to do, are in fabric decline and they don't have compliant amenities. And that puts them in a weaker position, if you will. The existing building and its capabilities do need to be understood. And from that point of view, a solution can be found. So I suppose what I'm saying with that is it's just very important to understand, have a good understanding of what you have, what your current problems are, before you can then move on to the next step. And then, of course, we've got the added problem of the fact that many ministers or priests' houses now have to, or will soon have to, comply with an EPC rating of a C. Many of them are an F due to their traditional construction and nature. And that is also causing a lot of concern in terms of thermal efficiency. So church groups are finding themselves in difficult situations. Decline in worship, economical challenges, and it's not a great time in the economy at the moment. Not many people have much money to be able to provide to their community or their local church. And then you've got the added pressure of the net zero targets that the government are fairly unrealistically putting on traditional buildings. So what I've tried to do is group together different situations that you as a church group might find yourself in. So your church might be in good repair with good compliant amenities. And if so, up here, the Church of Scotland may have marked that as a category A. So you're staying open and everything's good. Your church is in a satisfactory condition, but does not have compliant or acceptable disabled access or welfare facilities, or maybe your heating bills are too high, which is a common problem. Maybe you need to do significant fabric repairs to your property. And you have to do all this to ensure your church remains open, that the community groups can come in and still use them, and that you know that there is a project ahead and that improvements have to be made. Your church may have a number of facilities, including halls or amans, maybe they're joined together. You may only be able to retain one of these properties for worship. You might know that you might have to sell one of it or alter them to improve them. And that maybe one of those buildings will be disposed of, and then you have to combine all of the facilities in both the buildings into one building. And that, of course, can be challenging. And the last option is that you know your church or halls are closing. Maybe you're uniting with another church. Maybe it's getting sold privately. But you wish to retain the building, maybe via community buyout or another method. So you actually want to take on that church yourself and look after it and continue to contribute towards the community. So I could go on with the different options, as there's thousands of them. But in essence, what can be done if you find that change is afoot? So what do we do and where to start? You'll see a little picture of some ducks, because it's vital that you get your ducks in a row before you start anything. So I'm kind of looking at this from the architect's point of view, having spoken to an awful lot of working groups, some of them which are incredibly organized and some of whom they just don't know how to start. So I've tried to put it down in a piecemeal fashion that should be helpful. So firstly, it's vital that you have a proactive church working group and a property convener who understands the buildings. And in so many cases, that's just not possible because there's not the amount of people, there's not the right people, But if you can try and find the best people possible within the church to get a good working group together, that will certainly sort you out. As a collective group, and without too much procrastination, because we know there can be procrastination when we're trying to decide what to do, you need to decide what your aim is and what you want to achieve. So, for example, does the fabric of your church need repaired? If so, do you need grants? Maybe you need to decide which property to keep. Maybe you need to consolidate assets, or maybe you just need to put in a compliant toilet with a ramp. But whatever it is that you're needing to do, you need to decide what your aim is. The next step is to write this down in a church statement. I've seen many of them in the past. Most of them have been very, very good, and they put down basically what the ethos of their church is, what they believe, and what as a group currently they do, and in the future what they want to deliver. And I think that's really important. What does your church do at the moment? What does it provide? Because there's a wide range of provisions. You could be a church that only opens on a Sunday for service, or you could be a church that is open from 8 in the morning till 8 at night because you provide so many different community facilities. The next step is to prepare a feasibility brief. Maybe this is of development options. The document should be for all to understand. So this is a brief that you want to give to your potential new architect, that you want to agree with your congregation, your head of denomination. You can put in your business plan if it's for a community buyout, for example. But if you've got a good, solid document, that will go a long way. And then the next step is to appoint a professional who knows what they are doing. And Tom, as I said, is going to talk to you about how he did that. It's best to go out to 3 architects always, and to interview them and to ask them to provide a fee proposal, evidence of experience, thoughts on methodology of the project, because it's so important that you get the right personality for your church building. You have to get on with your architect, and they have to have a level of understanding and pick up the phone to you when you need to talk to them about stuff. You also need 3 quotes, because this is important if you need funding, as you'll need to demonstrate you've appointed your professional in accordance with grant conditions. So it's a tendering process, basically, procurement process. To note as well that many funders require your architect to be conservation accredited. There is a list of these on the RIS website in Scotland. You've also got conservation accreditation in RIBA as well down south. And that would give you a list of appropriate architects who have got the correct experience in the right area where your church possibly is. So Sarah asked me to come up with some top tips for working with your architect. So I've tried to do that. Once you've appointed your architect, once you've interviewed them, you're comfortable, you're happy with their fee quote, etc., communication is key. So provide as much information as you can to them. Now, that really means that your architect should meet with the church working group, or indeed the congregation. I was at an evening meeting last week where I met with the congregation to try and understand what everyone's needs were. You need to understand, obviously, both the building and the community needs and what your aim is. So it is common to ask your architect to speak with the community, the congregation, the working group, explain proposals, or if you're not at that stage, then gather information in terms of what the congregation and the working group in general would like. Third step is to be realistic on what can be achieved. There can be many hurdles to jump through, including community congregation approval, presbytery approval, your church approval, and then there's a question of money and funding. So keep it real, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Your architect should guide you as to appropriate steps. This could be the preparation of a feasibility study, or just straight into planning listed building application, maybe if you're putting a wee toilet in, or a fabric repair package, depending on what the brief is. So other considerations, as an architect who's worked with many church groups, is have one main point of contact to your architect. Having 30 different emails from 30 different people in the congregation is not an efficient way of doing things and confuses the process hugely. So have one lead within your church group who will liaise with the architect directly. Ensure your architect is listening to your church group and that their requirements are not being distracted by their design aspirations. Now, I am an architect and I don't want to badmouth other architects, but too bold or extravagant and unrealistic proposals end up in no proposals at all. So again, it's back to this being realistic of what you can achieve within a building. Taking note of the listing of the building, what is appropriate to the building, what are your likely consents going to be. It's also extremely helpful to have a couple of members in the church group who are savvy with money. This is because there's a lot of funding applications to be applied for. I mean, there are literally hundreds out there, and it takes up a lot of time and effort. And sometimes it's just too much for one person. So lightening the load does help. So my mandatory slide on fabric, because before you do anything, you absolutely have to look at the fabric of your building. Without an intact shell, wind and watertight or structurally stable, you're not really doing anything. And fabric repairs can be expensive. You might find that the budget for what you're wanting to do is actually taken up in the fabric repairs. So just a kind of general note, obviously slates, maintenance is so important. Maintenance of your church twice a year is so important. Don't let your gutters become a garden. Water will just come into your building and that will lead to water ingress and damp problems. Often we see in churches the slide like on the left-hand side where you've got this effervescence happening around stained glass windows. This tends to be because the outside of the church wall has been pointed in cement. And then what happens is that inside someone's in good faith painted it with a non-porous paint, and then you have moisture trapped within the wall itself. And the only way it's able to come out is in this kind of bubbling, salty water ingress situation. It can be quite easy to resolve, but don't let it go on for too long. I've got another wee slide here of a church that I'm working on in Winchborough at the moment. Unfortunately, we had to deal with some rather large structural issues before we started looking at the internals, and that involved putting in a lot of steel work into a gable because it was kind of collapsing. So we have done that now, and now we're moving on to the internal works. And of course, if you do have a big fabric repair project on the go, it can be very time consuming. It can be quite stressful. And it's just important to make sure that this is all dealt with in a pragmatic fashion so you can move on to the next step, if indeed there is a next step. So thermal efficiency, something we get asked about all the time. So when considering any alterations, you have to consider the thermal efficiency of the building, the church, or the manse. There will always be areas of heat loss and cold spots. Common problems we're asked to resolve is heating that isn't working, old-fashioned heating, gas heating that is maybe no longer allowed because of your denomination. And of course, reducing drafts is really important in any building, but especially in church buildings when you've got single stained glass windows and holes, as you can see here. I think that there we go. So that's moving quite nicely for us. So obviously a lot of air getting in through that window. We've talked about the internal effervescence, but what I've started to do is kind of take a note on all the different types of window problems there are and what you can do. We've been looking a lot at internal secondary glazing. This can be beneficial because a lot of the time you don't need listed building consent for it because it's internal. and it can make a dramatic improvement to your heating bills and the exclusion of drafts, etc. So of course it depends what kind of window you have. You can refurbish your existing windows. You can refurbish your existing stained glass windows. It's just that it is so expensive to do it. If it's a man's building, for example, um, or a priest's house, then obviously you could have sash and case windows that you could refurbish quite easily and put in secondary glazing. But it becomes a lot more complicated when you've got arched bay rose windows within a church. And so you have to really think about what our options are there. So it's quite, it's almost an individual project within itself, but getting it right can make a huge difference. So that's really something that you should ask your architect to look into, meet with some secondary glazing specialists on site and get the best professional opinion. So what resources are out there to help? Well, you're on a Zoom, which is one of them, which is great. Your professional should guide you when appointed as to what help there is. There is an awful lot of help out there. It's not necessarily joined together, which, to be fair, is what Heritage Trust Network tries to do. But once you kind of get into the mode of speaking to people, you will then be introduced to other people who can also help you. There's a huge amount of funding bodies out there. Some of them are very specific. So you might be able to get funding for a commercial kitchen only, or you might be able to get funding for some lead work to your building. You could get a large funding package through Heritage Lottery Fund, for example. And from that, maybe smaller funders could come. But it does generally tend to be specific to what you're aiming to achieve. If you're considering a community buyout, then get in touch with the Community Ownership Support Service. I was given the slide yesterday to pass on to you guys with contact details and numbers there that can help you if that is the route you are thinking of taking. And also just being part of a network group such as Heritage Trust Network and speaking with other churches who have gone through the same process. So if you know of other churches, or Heritage Trust Network indeed can give you a leg up to speaking to someone who's gone through the same process as you, then this can really go a long way. Right, I'm aware I'm running out of time. Here I'm on to my case studies now. So I've started to give you a range of different ones that we've been involved with over the last couple of years. So small projects can be absolutely vital to the continued use of a building. We've put in a lot of toilets recently and ramps to church buildings just to get them up to scratch and to keep them open. And whilst they can be really small projects, they can be quite intricate because churches don't have the best drainage. There tends to be a lot of graveyards around them, and we don't want to dig down for obvious reasons. And then you've also got the aesthetics to think about in terms of what is appropriate for your building, what is appropriate to your church, especially if it's listed. So here's a wee one in Dollar Parish Church, where we have put in an accessible toilet and just a small new toilet within an existing vestibule area. And this was because to get to the toilet, you have to go outside and downstairs and into a very damp, unpleasant room, which wasn't really working. So new toilets will make a huge difference to the congregation and community users of that church. In Fortingall, which is an absolutely beautiful little church, it was very much the same situation. You had to walk down the main aisle and walk past the area where the minister would be speaking to then go to the toilet behind. So it was all very inconvenient. And again, facilities very damp, non-compliant, drainage not really working. A lot of requests as well for tea preps. And these can be very, very, very cleverly done, set within areas with the same timber paneling maybe that the church has, so that it's quite subtle, but you're still getting those modern facilities. So all of this is good stuff, guys, and can really help. So here's quite a large fabric repair project that I did a few years ago now at Cadzow Parish Church in Hamilton. It was a really challenging project. They were lucky enough to get Heritage Lottery funding for this, but the reason it was so challenging is because the slopes were so steep and we had to strip every single slope because the slates were undersized, they were porous, and they were nail sick. Underneath the slates, we had horsehair felt, which meant that it had to be completely stripped away from the sarking. The boys finished their day every day just covered. It was a really, really challenging project. The the very, very high slopes of the church meant that we had to use a combination of scaffolding and then scaffolding boards and harnesses and ropes, which didn't make it easier. But it needed to be done. The church needed a fully comprehensive fabric repair project carried out, and it was a daunting task. There was only one person involved in the funding, and she found it really challenging, which is why I've recommended that you have more than one person involved. It was B listed, so we had to be very appropriate with the fabric that we were putting back. And it was just very important that we got the church wind and watertight, and from a health and safety point of view, much better. The project value was around 425,000. About 300 of that was funded by Heritage Lottery Fund. And then we got other people involved. And this is where it got complicated because we got funding from Viridor and we got funding from RAIN and other small funding bodies. But what was challenging about that was we had to make sure that the lead, say that Viridor were funding us, was put on the church room at the right time to tie in with their funding timescales. So that was quite a practical challenge in terms of getting the lead, getting the slates, getting everything in piecemeal fashion ready. And that's where you need a good quantity surveyor. And we had a very good quantity surveyor on site. So we've not really talked about quantity surveyors, but they can be absolutely worth their weight in gold if you're needing to coordinate all this in terms of money. And obviously you needed a head for heights because it was awfully high up there. However, a really successful project working with an absolutely lovely, lovely group of people. And now it's wind and water time. So then we go on to a more non-traditional building. So this is one I'm currently working on at the moment. It's called Holy Trinity Church in Wester Hailes, and this is a super project. I'm so excited to be involved in it. It is mainly a place of worship. This is one of the few churches I've come across recently that have a rising congregation, which is incredible. It has amazing community facilities. It has a lovely cafe, a food bank. There are youth groups. There are counselling services. They've just introduced Christian Against Poverty. There is so much going on in this church. And the problem is it has great facilities, albeit they are tired. It has a great congregation and a great community spirit. There's, a lot of people who are needing assistance and needing help. And this is exactly what this church is providing. But the building is 50 years old and it's tired. And you can see that from its roofs. Its fabric is wearing. It's not very thermally efficient anymore. And quite frankly, it's just bursting at the seams. So they are needing to do something to this existing building to future-proof it and to make sure that the community and the church can continue to provide the services that it does. So Holy Trinity wished to assess their current accommodation, their users and uses, and they were looking at bettering their facilities. So there's a fantastic working group involved in this church, and they did a super church plan and a super development feasibility brief. They interviewed architects, they asked them to tender for the services, they did absolutely everything spot on. And from all of that information, we prepared a detailed feasibility study where we looked at 5 different options. And don't be scared to ask your architect for more options if you're not happy with the options that they've provided for. We considered demolition, extension, internal refurbishment, part internal refurbishment, changing of roof styles, etc. And because we had such a detailed brief, and because there was a user requirement brief, and because we'd made with the working group, and we'd walked around the cafe and we'd spoken to people in it. We knew what was needed. So Holy Trinity appointed ourselves and sub-consultants, and sometimes you do need sub-consultants depending on the scale of your project. For this one, we've got a structural engineer, we've got a mechanical and electrical engineer to deal with the heating, the lighting, and the thermal efficiency to calculate the amount of solar panels that you might need, and of course, the very well needed QS that we do all need when we're doing a project. And it was understood that to gain a realistic understanding that we did have to have all of these professionals involved. We now have a very firm brief. We now have a chosen option, and we are now moving forward. So in essence, church group preparation equals correct design team appointed, equals comprehensive information, and an informed decision being made because you have all the information to make that decision. Next one is a very exciting project in Kirk of St Nicholas up in Aberdeen. Now, this has literally just come off the ground, but why I wanted to talk to you about it is because of an example of a project that took over 2 years of research and planning before my client even got the keys. Money was spent assessing, meeting the community, doing building investigations, and there was prior to even getting the keys to this church, my client had a finite understanding of the building and the community. We spent many trips up to Aberdeen, talking to the local community, talking to understand what everyone wants and understanding the building, speaking to previous architects who had worked on the building. Luckily for us, the property inspection officer was also the minister of the building. So we got this huge amount of information. So the church is category A listed, hugely steeped in history and significant, with over 100 artifacts within it, and sitting right off Union Street in the centre of Aberdeen. It's divided in ownership. So the West Kirk, the Drum Aisle and the Tower is now owned by Edinburgh Pallet, who are soon to be renamed Scott Art. So who are my clients? Edinburgh Pallet. They are a community-based charity with an established background of providing community services based around the arts. Their focus is that of a community spirit and of interaction, providing spaces in a community hub to enable a flexible and supportive environment for the local community and associated charity bodies. So before we even looked at taking over the church, we talked to the local food banks, we talked to where free food is given to the homeless, which is just outside Marks and Spencer's. We're in communication about that being altered to being within this church once the alteration works have been done. So it's not just about providing facilities within the building. We're reaching out to the community to really try and make this a focal point. So how much work was involved? Well, a lot. So first of all, we had to get the church to sell the building to our client for £1. That took 2 years. We spent a lot of time getting to know the building, the community, the current stakeholders. Obviously, there's people still involved in the building, and we still want them to remain involved, and gaining a full bank of information on what it would involve for Edinburgh Pallet to own this building. What would it mean to them? What would they have to do to respect this wonderful building and to keep it intact, to not make it detrimental, to be appropriate to the building? So all this highlights my earlier points of communication research and understanding of what is existing. It is so important before you even embark on a project of this nature. Oh, sorry. And so it got more exciting because then people started reaching out to us in terms of the community and education. So within this church project, the 7 incorporated trains of Aberdeen will continue to remain involved. There's an oil and gas chaplaincy, St John's Chapel within the church that will remain open. There will still be services. Robert Gordon College use this for events, graduations, as do Robert Gordon University. Royal Engineers, Burgesses of Guild, Aberdeen Council and the Church of Scotland will continue to use this building, but the building is just being adapted for additional uses. The additional uses are tourists, charity artists, community groups, workshops, pop-ups, craft fair, exhibitions, candlelight concerts. The list goes on and on. But what's happening at the moment is my client only got the church about 3 weeks ago, if I'm honest with you. And we have been in collaboration with Robert Gordon University for about 9 or 10 months now. And they've been using the church to help them with their research project. So currently, Robert Gordon University is using the church to, I suppose, try out their 3D scanning equipment that they have received funding from the government. So from their 3D scanning equipment, they are able to look at scan the outside of the church, scan the inside of the church, produce 3D models and produce plans, elevations and sections. So it's really quite extraordinary. I just arranged last week for third-year architectural students at Robert Gordon's University to use the Kirk of St Nicholas as their first term project. So I'm going up to speak with them next week about the church, the challenges, and attempt to be realistic with them, albeit they are students, so they're allowed to be unrealistic, about what they can put in this church. And then there'll be an exhibition of their work within the church. So it demonstrates that a building this nature can provide opportunities for many different opportunities. And we've had to carefully consider what we're doing within this church. And many of your churches will be listed with fixed pews or box pews, and you might want to remove them, and that might be a problem. So we have come to a compromise of hoping to remove a few pews, but relocating them to Robert Gordon College, which is a school across the road, because they need pews within their assembly hall. So that was what we worked hard on to get to. So there's always compromises with everything, and you do have to think about the significance and the importance of the building as well. So Sarah, I think I've gone over time. Summary: assess what the church's situation is and what is your realistic goal. Gather a good, dedicated, decisive church working group and be clear about what you want to achieve. And be realistic. Write a statement, a feasibility brief, and appoint a competent professional who knows what they're doing. They have to know what they're doing. It's so important. Church group preparation, correct design team appointed, comprehensive information does make an informed decision. And depending on whether you own the property or not, so for example, my client now owns Kirk of St Nicholas, or if your church is under denomination, keep in touch with the higher bodies of that denomination, because communication is key. You may not be may not own the church, but you are its key holder. So there is a lot of assistance out there. You just need to key into the right areas of support and lean on your professional who has experience of this to help. So important. And good luck. So that's it from me, Sarah.
Brilliant. That was perfect. Perfect.
Will I stop sharing?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Sorry, I went over a wee bit.
No, that's great. I think you have truly placed yourself as someone who really knows what they're doing, which is lovely. You've worked with so many church projects. That's really interesting.
And I think it's just the amount of people that the church groups that I've worked with, they're so diverse, which just makes my job so interesting, to be honest with you. But you know, it could just be 2 people in a working group, or there could be 15. You know, it just depends what the project is and what you're trying to achieve. But it's getting the ducks in the row at the start that will make life so much easier.